Chapter 38, The Final Test. On January 2nd, year of the Capybara, the day before Winter Conclave, Scythe Carey took Citra on a long drive to the Mid-America Capitol building. Your final test will be tonight, but you won't know the results until tomorrow's conclave, she told Citra. But Citra already knew that. It's the same test year to year for every apprentice, and each apprentice must take the test alone. That was something Citra didn't know. It only made sense that the final test would be some sort of standard that all candidates had to pass, but somehow the thought of having to face the test alone and not in the company of the others was troubling, because now it wouldn't be a competition with Rowan and the others. She'd be competing against no one but herself. You should tell me what the test is. I can't, said Scythe Carey. You mean you won't? Scythe Carey thought about that. You're right, I won't. If I may speak frankly, Your Honor, when have you ever not spoken frankly, Citra? Citra cleared her throat and tried to be her most persuasive self. You play too fair, and it puts me at a disadvantage. You wouldn't want me to suffer just because you're too honorable, would you? In our line of work, we must hold on to every bit of honor we have. I'm sure other scythes tell their apprentices what the final test is. Perhaps, said Scythe Carey, but then again, perhaps not. There are some traditions not even the unscrupulous among us would dare break. Citra crossed her arms and said nothing more. She knew she was pouting. She knew it was childish, but she didn't care. You trust Scythe Faraday, do you not? Asked Scythe Carey. I do. Have you come to trust me at least as much? I have. Then trust me now and let the question go. I have faith in your ability to shine in the final test without knowing what the test is. Yes, Your Honor. They arrived at 8 that evening and were told that, by the luck of the draw, Citra was to be tested last. Rowan and the 2 other candidates beside them were to go first. She and Scythe Carey were put in a room to wait, and wait, and wait some more. Was that a gunshot? Citra said, perhaps an hour in. Citra didn't know whether or not it had been her imagination. Shh, was what Scythe Carey responded with. Finally, a guard came in to get her. Scythe Carey did not wish her good luck. She just gave her a serious nod. I'll be waiting for you when you're done, she said. Citra was brought to a long room that seemed unpleasantly cold. There were 5 scythes seated in comfortable chairs at one end. She recognized 2 of them, Scythe Mandela and Scythe Miar. The other 3 she did not. The bejeweling committee, she realized. Before her was a table covered with a clean white tablecloth, and on that tablecloth, evenly spaced, were weapons: a pistol, a shotgun, a scimitar, a bowie knife, and a vial with a poison pill. What are these for? Citra asked. Then she realized it was a stupid question. She knew what they were for, so she rephrased it. What is it exactly that you want me to do? Look to the other end of the room, Scythe Mandela told her, pointing. A spotlight came up on another chair at the far end of the long room that had been hidden in shadows, one not as comfortable as theirs. Someone sat in it, hands and legs bound, with a canvas hood covering his or her head. We want to see how you might glean, Scythe Miar said. For this purpose, we've prepared a unique subject for you to demonstrate. What do you mean unique? See for yourself, said Scythe Mandela. Citra approached the figure. She could hear faint snuffling from beneath the hood. She pulled it off. Nothing could have prepared her for what she saw. Now she understood why Scythe Carey did not tell her. Because bound to that chair, gagged, terrified, and tearful, was her brother, Ben. He tried to speak, but nothing but muffled grunts came out from behind the gag. She backed away, then ran back to the 5 scythes. No, you can't do this. You can't make me do it. We can't make you do anything, said one of the scythes she didn't know, a woman in violet with Pan-Asian leanings. If you do this, you do it by choice. Then the woman stepped forward and held a small box out to Citra. Your weapon will be random. Choose a slip of paper from the box. Citra reached in and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She dared not open it. She turned to look at her brother, sitting so helpless in the chair. How can you do this to people? She screamed. My dear, said Scythe Miar with practiced patience, it's not a gleaning because you are not yet a scythe. You merely have to render him deadish. An ambudrone will take him to be revived as soon as you complete the task we've put before you. But he'll remember. Yes, said Scythe Mandela, and so will you. One of the other scythes she did not know crossed her arms and huffed, much the way she had done on the drive here. She's too resistant, he said. Let her go. This night's already gone on too long. Give her time, said Scythe Mandela sternly. The 5th scythe, a short man with an odd frown about him, stood and read from a sheet of parchment that could have been 100 years old. You may not be coerced into doing this. You may take all the time you need. You must use the weapon assigned. When you are done, you will leave the subject and approach the committee to be assessed in your performance. Is all of this clear to you? Citra nodded. A verbal response, please. Yes, it's clear. He sat back down and she unfolded the slip of paper. On it was a single word, knife. She dropped the paper to the floor. I can't do this, she told herself. I can't. But Scythe Curie's voice came gently to her. Yes, Citra, you can. It was then it occurred to her that every Scythe, since the Scythedom began, had to take this test. Every single one of them was forced to take the life of someone they loved. Yes, that person would be revived, but it didn't change the cold-blooded act. A person's subconscious mind can't differentiate between permanent and temporary killings. Even after he's revived, how could she bear to face her brother again? What if she kills Ben? She will always have killed him. Why, she asked, why must I do this? The irritable Scythe gestured to the door. There's the exit. If it's too much for you, then leave. I think she means it is a legitimate question, said Scythe Maillard. The irritable Scythe scoffed, the short one shrugged, the Pan-Asian one tapped her foot, and Scythe Mandela leaned forward. You must do this so that you can move forward as a Scythe, Scythe Mandela said, knowing in your heart that the most difficult thing you'll ever have to do has already been done. If you can do this, added Scythe Maillard, then you have the inner strength needed to be a Scythe. Even though a big part of Citra wanted to bolt through the door and run from this, she squared her shoulders, stood tall, reached down, and took the Bowie knife. Concealing it in her waist, she approached her brother. Only when she was close to him did she pull it out. Don't be afraid, she said. She knelt down and used the knife to cut the bonds on his legs, then the ones that held his wrists to the chair. She tried to untie his gag but couldn't, so she cut that as well. Can I go home now? Ben asked with a helpless voice that was more than enough to break her heart. Not yet, she told him, still kneeling beside him. Soon, though. Are you going to hurt me, Citra? Citra couldn't control her tears and didn't even try. What was the point? Yes, Ben, I'm sorry. Are you going to glean me? He could barely get the words out. No, she told him. They'll take you to a revival center. You'll be good as new. You promise? I promise. He seemed the tiniest bit relieved. She didn't explain to him why she had to do this, and he didn't ask. He trusted her, trusted that whatever reason she had, it was a good one. Will it hurt, he asked. Again she found she couldn't lie to him about it. Yes, it will, but not for long. He took a moment to think about that, process it, accept it. Then he said, Can I see it? For a moment she wasn't sure what he was talking about until he pointed to the knife. She carefully put it into his hands. It's heavy, he said. Did you know that Texan scythes only glean with Bowie knives? Is that where you'll be going when you're a Scythe, Texas? No, Ben, I'll be right here. He turned the knife in his hand, both of them watching as the light glinted off the shiny blade. Then he gave it back to her. I'm so scared, Citra, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I know, so am I. Scared is okay. Will I get ice cream, he asked. I hear they give you ice cream at revival centers. Citra nodded and wiped a tear from his cheek. Close your eyes, Ben. Think of the ice cream you want, then tell me. Ben did as he was told. I want a hot fudge sundae, 3 scoops, with chocolate chip. Before he could finish, she pulled him close and thrust the blade just as she had seen Scythe Curie do it. She wanted to wail in agony, but wouldn't let herself. Ben opened his eyes. He looked at her, and in a second it was done. Ben was gone. Citra hurled the blade away and cradled her brother, then laid him gently on the floor. From a door behind them that she hadn't even seen, 2 revival medics hurried in, put her deadish brother on a gurney, and went out the way they came in. Lights came on the scythes. They seemed so much farther away than before. It seemed like an impossibly long walk to cross the room to them, and they began a bruising barrage of comments. Sloppy. Not at all. There's barely any blood. She put the weapon in his hand. Do you know how risky that was? And all that unnecessary banter. She was preparing him, making sure he was ready. Why should that matter? She showed courage, but more importantly, she was compassionate. Isn't that what we're called upon to be? We're called upon to be efficient. Efficiency must be in the service of compassion. That's a matter of opinion. Then the Scythes fell silent, apparently agreeing to disagree. She suspected that Scythes Mandela and Maillard were on her side and that the irritable one was not. As for the other 2, she had no idea where they stood. Thank you, Miss Terranova, said Scythe Maillard. You may go now. The results will be announced at Conclave tomorrow. Scythe Curie was waiting for her in the hall. Citra found herself furious at the woman. You should have told me. It would have only made it worse. And if they sensed that you knew before you went in that room, you would have been disqualified. She looked at Citra's hands. Come, you need to wash up. There's a bathroom just this way. How did it go with the other candidates? Citra asked. From what I heard, one young woman flatly refused and left the room. One boy began but broke down and couldn't complete what he started. What about Rowan? Citra asked. Scythe Carey wouldn't look at her. He drew the pistol as his weapon, and, still Scythe Carey hesitated. Tell me! He pulled the trigger even before they finished reading him the instructions. Citra grimaced at the thought. Scythe Carey was right. He didn't sound like the same Rowan she used to know. What had he been through to turn him so cold? She didn't dare imagine. I am the blade that is swung by your hand, slicing a rainbow's arc. I am the clapper, but you are the bell, toiling the gathering dark. If you are the singer, then I am the song, a threnody, requiem, dirge. You made me the answer for all the world's need, humanity's undying urge. Threnody, from the collective works of the Honorable Scythe Socrates. Chapter 39, Winter Conclave. At midnight, immunity for Citra Terranova and Roman Damish expired. Either one of them now could be gleaned, and if the edict was followed and the Scythian would make certain that it was, one would glean the other. Around the world, Scythes convened to discuss matters of life, but more to the point, matters of death. The first conclave for the year in mid-America was a historic one. Never before had Scythes permanently lost their lives in a gleaning event, and the controversial nature of that event made it more significant, as well as the controversy surrounding one apprentice's 3 months' absence following a bogus accusation by the Mid-American High Blade. Even the World Scythe Council had their eye on Fulcrum City today, and although the names of the apprentices are rarely known before their regional bejeweling committee, scythes from every corner of the globe now knew the names of Citra Terranova and Rowan Damish. Fulcrum City was blistering cold that morning. Ice layered the marble steps leading up to the Capitol, making the stairs treacherous. More than one scythe slipped, spraining an ankle or breaking an arm. Healing nanites were taxed that morning, to the delight of spectators who were thrilled by anything that slowed the scythe's ascent, allowing more photo ops. Rowan arrived alone in a public car with no sponsor and no one to shepherd him in. He was dressed in the one color that scythes shunned, black. It made his green apprentice armband stand out and gave him a silent air of defiance. At Harvest Conclave he had been a footnote, if that, but now spectators jockeyed for position to take his picture. He ignored them, looking at no one as he climbed the stairs, making sure to keep his footing firm. One scythe next to him stumbled on the ice and fell. Scythe Emerson, Rowan thought it was, although they'd never been introduced. Rowan reached out his hand to help the man up, but Emerson just glared at him and refused his help. I want no assistance from you, he told Rowan, the emphasis on the word you filled with more vitriol than anyone had expressed to Rowan in all his 17 years. But then, when he reached the top of the stairs, a scythe he didn't even know greeted him, and said in a comforting voice, You've endured more than any apprentice should, Mr. Damish. I do hope you achieve scythehood, and once you do, I hope we might share a pot of tea. The offer sounded genuine and not the product of political posturing. That was the way of things as he entered the rotunda, hard glares from some and comforting grins from others. It seemed few were undecided about him. He was either the victim of circumstance or a criminal, the likes of whom had not been seen since the age of mortality. Rowan wished he knew which of the two it was. Citra had arrived before Rowan. She stood with Scythe Carey in the rotunda with no appetite to partake of the lavish breakfast spread. The conversation in the rotunda was, of course, all about Tonist cloister tragedy, and as Citra listened to various snippets of conversation, she found herself angered that it was all about the 4 dead scythes. No one lamented that so many Tonists were gleaned. Some, in fact, callously joked about it. In the wake of the Tonist tragedy, Conclave takes on a certain resonance, don't you think? She heard someone say. No pun intended, but of course it was. Scythe Carey was even more anxious than she had been at Harvest Conclave. Scythe Mandela told me that you performed well last night, she told Citra. But even as he said it, he was guarded. What do you think that means? I don't know. All I know is that if you lose today, Citra, I will never forgive myself. It was absurd to think that the great scythe Marie Curie, the grand dame of death, would care so much for her, and would even think there could be any failure on her part. I've had the benefit of being trained by the 2 greatest scythes who ever lived, you and Scythe Faraday. If that hasn't prepared me for today, nothing could have. Scythe Carey beamed with bittersweet pride. When this is over and you are ordained, I hope you'll do me the esteemed honor of staying on with me as a junior scythe. Others will make advances, perhaps even from distant regions. They'll try to tell you there are things you can learn from them that you couldn't learn from me. Perhaps that's true, but I do hope you'll choose to remain anyway." Her eyes were on the brink of tears. If she blinked, she would fall, but Scythe Curie kept them pooled on her lower lashes, too proud to be seen weeping in conclave. Citra smiled. "I would have it no other way, Marie." It was the first time Citra had ever called her by her first name. She was surprised at how natural it felt. As they waited for conclave to convene, other scythes came up to greet them. None spoke of Citra's detainment or her escape to the chill Argentine region, but some did joke with Marie about that embarrassing journal entry. "In the age of mortality, love and murder often went hand in hand," quipped Scythe Twain. "Perhaps our dear Scythe Faraday might have pegged you perfectly." "Oh, go glean yourself," Curie said, only partially suppressing her grin. "Only if I can attend my own funeral, my dear." Then he wished Citra good luck and sauntered off. That's when Citra saw Rowan enter the rotunda. It wasn't exactly as if silence fell all over the room, but the volume did dip significantly and then rose again. There was a presence about him now, not like that of a scythe, but something else. A pariah, perhaps. But never had a pariah had such a chilling effect on bringers of death. There were those who were saying that Rowan had killed those scythes in cold blood and set the fire to hide the evidence. Others said he was lucky to have survived and bore no guilt. Citra suspected that whatever the truth was, it was more complicated than either of those things. "Don't talk to him," Scythe Curie said when she saw her glancing in his direction. "Don't even let him see you're looking his way. It will just make things more difficult for both of you." "I know," Citra admitted, although she secretly hoped she would be brash enough to push through the crowd and come to her, and maybe say something, anything that would prove to her he wasn't the unthinkable criminal people were saying he was. If she was chosen today, Citra would not defy the edict to glean Rowan, but she did have a plan that might save both of them. It was far from foolproof, and to be brutally honest with herself, it was more like a desperate grasping at straws than a plan, but even the faintest glimmer of hope was better than no hope at all. If she was deluding herself, at least it would allow her to get through this awful day. Rowan played this day over in his mind many times from beginning to end. He had decided that he would not go up to Citra when he saw her. He did not need an advisor to tell him it was better this way. Let them stay separate and apart until that miserable moment of truth that would keep them apart forever. If she won, Rowan was certain she would glean him. She was duty-bound to do it. It would tear her apart, but in the end she would do what had to be done. He wondered how she might go about it. Perhaps she would break his neck, bringing everything full circle and wrapping up their doomed twin apprenticeship with a nice red bow. Admittedly, Rowan was afraid to die, but what he feared more than death were the depths that he now knew he was capable of reaching. The ease with which he had rendered his mother deadish during the test the night before spoke volumes about the person he'd become. He'd rather be gleaned than be that person. Of course, it was possible he'd be chosen instead of Citra. Then things would get interesting. He decided he wouldn't glean himself. That would be too pointless and pathetic a gesture. If he was ordained, he would defy the edict, invoking the 10th commandment, which clearly said he was beholden to no laws beyond the 10, including any edicts levied by the Scythedom. He would refuse to glean Citra and defend her life by taking out any scythes who tried to do it for him with bullet, blade, and his own bare hands. He would turn Conclave into a brutal and bloody battleground until they took him down, which wouldn't be easy, considering how skilled he'd become at killcraft and how motivated he was to wreak as much havoc as possible. And the irony of it was they couldn't even glean him for it. Once he was ordained, their hands were tied by the 7th commandment. They could punish him, though. They could make him die 1,000 deaths and then lock him away for eternity, and it would truly be an eternity because he could never give them the satisfaction of gleaning himself. Another reason why he would rather be gleaned by Citra. A single death at her capable hands sounded awfully good when compared with the alternative. The breakfast spread in the rotunda was an elaborate one: slabs of real smoked salmon, hard-crusted artisanal breads, and a waffle station with every conceivable topping. Only the best for the mid-American scythes. Rowan ate with rare gluttony this morning, for once allowing himself to fully sate his appetite, and as he ate he stole a few glances at Citra. Even now she looked radiant to him. How ridiculous that he'd be romanticizing her in these final hours. What could have once been love was now the resignation of a heart long broken. Luckily for Rowan, his heart had grown so cold Its fracturing could not hurt him any more. Once Conclave convened, Citra found herself tuning out most of the morning's ritual, choosing to fill her mind with memories of the life she was about to leave, because in one way or another she would be leaving it. She focused on thoughts of her parents and her brother, who was still in a revival center. If she was ordained today, the home where she grew up would never be home again. Her biggest consolation would be that Ben and her parents would have immunity from gleaning for as long as Citra lived. After the tolling of the names and the ritual washing, the entire morning was dedicated to a heated debate about whether or not fire should be banned as a method of gleaning. Usually Highblade Xenocrates did nothing but mediate and postpone discussions for a later date. The fact that he was advocating for the ban was something everyone in attendance took seriously. Even so, there were strong voices against it. "I will not have my rights to bear arms trampled upon," railed one disgruntled Scythe. "Every one of us should have the freedom to use flamethrowers, explosives, and any other incendiary device." It was met with both boos and applause. "We need this ban to protect us from tragic incidents in the future," insisted Xenocrates. "It was no accident," shouted someone, and almost half the room voiced their bitter agreement. Citra looked to Rowan, who sat with 2 empty seats on either side of him, for they were still earmarked for the dead. He made no move to defend himself or to deny the claim. Scythe Curie leaned close to Citra. "As terrible as that fire was, there are plenty of Scythes happy to see Goddard and his disciples permanently removed from duty. Although they'd never admit it, they're glad the fire happened, whether it was an accident or not." "And there are a lot of others who admired Goddard," Citra pointed out. "Indeed, the Scythedom seems evenly split on that matter." Regardless, common sense finally prevailed, and fire was banned in mid-America as a method of gleaning. At lunch, Citra, who still found she couldn't eat, watched from a distance as Rowan stuffed himself, just as he had at breakfast, as if he had no care in the world. "He knows it's his last meal," a Scythe she didn't know suggested. Although the woman was clearly showing her support for Citra found herself annoyed. "I can't see how it's any of your business." The Scythe walked away, confused by Citra's hostility. At 6 that evening, all other Conclave business ceased, and the day resolved into its final stage. "Candidates for Scythehood, please rise," commanded the Conclave clerk. Citra and Rowan rose to a rumble of whispers in the assembly. "I thought there were 4, said the Highblade. "There were, Your Excellency," said the clerk, "but the other 2 failed their final test and were dismissed." "Very well, then," said Xenocrates. "Let's get on with it, then." The clerk stood up, formally announcing them. "The Mid-American Scythedom calls Rowan Daniel Damish and Citra Carita Terranova. Please come forward." Then, keeping his eyes fixed on Scythe Mandela, who waited for them before the rostrum with a single ring, Citra and Rowan strode to the front of the assembly hall to meet their destiny, one way or another. It is with bittersweet joy that I watch the bejeweling of new junior Scythes at the end of each conclave, joy because they are our hope and still kindle the idealism of the first Scythes in their hearts, but bittersweet because I know that someday they will become so tired and jaded they will take their own lives, as all those first Scythes eventually did. Yet each time the new Scythes are bejeweled, I still rejoice, because it allows me, if only for a few glorious moments, to believe that we will all choose to live forever. From the Gleaning Journal of H.S. Curie.